Right, Frank mentioned the firing of the United States Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Well, let's go now to the White House, to CGTN's White House correspondent, Nathan King. And Nathan, this happened just a day after the election, and it came at a time when there is a probe, an investigation into the president by a special counsel. What can you tell us about this firing?
Yeah, I mean, let's go back a bit. Basically, Jeff Sessions was the biggest supporter of Donald Trump during his campaign, the first senator to actually back him. Became his attorney general, but because he'd basically met with Russian officials, recused himself from that investigation. It went to the number 2 in the Justice Department, his deputy, Rod Rosenstein, and that's where we were. Trump was very upset. He wanted to fire him. We saw it over Twitter. He was told not to. It would cause a constitutional crisis. And lo and behold, as you said, straight away after the midterms, he has now fired him and put in place not the deputy, but the chief of staff, Matthew Whitaker, who is known to be very, very friendly with the White House and has even said that the Mueller probe is a bit of a witch hunt and question whether they should look into business practices. And so now he's acting. They say they're going to appoint someone new. Yeah. But look at the electoral timetable here. The new Congress does not come until January. They've got a bit of wiggle room. Is this pressure on the Mueller probe? Are they going to end it? All these questions just a day after midterms. And there's a lot of people here, even at the White House, that were surprised by it. And of course, Democrats who are going to have investigative power in the House of Representatives will say they're going to look into this right away when they take office in January. Right.
Now, Nathan, you've been covering this election for months. You've traveled the country, talking to people all over the place. Democrats were looking for what they termed a blue wave, a sort of emphatic win during these midterm elections. Was this a blue wave, or was it a bit more of a ripple?
I think it's between a ripple and a tsunami. I would definitely call it a wave. Look, 9% swing in the House of Representatives is really typical of most midterms. It's not bad at all. Even the Senate went against them, but the map was absolutely horrible. They lost 3 seats, but if you count the popular vote, which of course you don't do here in the United States, 55% Democrat in the Senate races. So, you know, if I was Nancy Pelosi, I'd say, well, that was pretty good. Things went against them. Florida was horrible, but 1.5 million ex-felons are going to be voting in 2020 due to a ballot initiative there. That's going to really alter the electoral math there. So, you know, it was a win for the Democrats, and the spin here all day has been, it hasn't been, and it really sort of belies the fact of what's going on. And I think the expanded map in the Senate for Republicans perhaps gives them a false sense of security going into 2020, where the Senate map won't be so good, and of course there's a potential re-election too. And, you know, 2 years in this Trump presidency, so much has happened. What's going to happen in the next 2 years?
All right, Frank, it's the day after, so let's talk about what's going to happen now. The Democrats take the House of Representatives. What does that mean for Trump's agenda?
Well, it means that he's not going to be able to breeze through an agenda if he could do it before, which he couldn't do it before when he had 2 Republican houses, right? He wasn't able to get his signature proposal, which he said when he was campaigning he was going to do in a day, the first day, which was to repeal Obamacare. So they're going to have to look to see where they can work together, and even more importantly, whether they want to work together. Right. And that's where the Democrats have some real decisions to make. Do they want to cooperate with Donald Trump and be able to turn to the public and say, look what we did? Or do they want to be the opposition party and they're just going to oppose everything? So where people look for some progress is on infrastructure. Everybody can agree our roads need to be repaved and our bridges need to be fixed because they're crumbling.
Well, just drive down the street here in D.C. They're a disaster.
I almost got lost in a pothole on the way here, so I'm glad to be here. But beyond that, pretty limited.
Amy, what is your view on what the Democrats are going to do in the House of Representatives? You know, we've been hearing all these stories about there's going to be greater oversight now of the president and what he does, that they're going to open all kinds of investigations, that they have the power of the subpoena. They can ask for documents, including his tax returns.
Sure, and they've already indicated that they intend to do all that. So the simple question is, Democrats in the House, do they want to govern or resist? Do they want to legislate or investigate? And if they spend the next 2 years with just investigations, partisan headlines, showing up on the cable news networks, throwing up Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, and all of these old Democratic war horses, I don't think it's going to go very well for them when it comes to the voter and the voter's judgment in 2020.
But can they do both?
But one thing that I think is a really sort of interesting, counterintuitive wrinkle, and it's certainly contrary to conventional wisdom, is that the current majority leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, he has been on the record to say, actually a lot of big things can get done with divided government. Look at a tax reform bill, look at a welfare reform when Bill Clinton was president. He said that could only happen with divided government because both sides had to compromise if they wanted to come to the table and strike a deal. And let's also remember, President Trump, he's actually not that ideological. One of the big knocks on him during the primary campaign from conservatives, National Review dedicated an entire issue opposing Donald Trump, was that he wasn't conservative. He wasn't ideological. I think this is somebody who does want to have his successes, and he is willing to negotiate. Earlier this spring, he was telling his lieutenants, to try to find something to do with Democrats. But again, it's going to be up to Democrats and then, of course, Republicans in the Senate how much they want to have symbolic partisan victories versus serving the American people.
Morgan, we now have a divided Congress, as we can see. Is that going to lead to something that we used to see during the Obama years, gridlock?
Yeah, I think it could. And I think that Amy's point was a very good one about the Democrats want to sort of investigate or legislate and the like. The problem I think they have is that the reason why they did so well mostly is because of anger at President Trump. The voters that voted them in that's why they voted. They want to see them go after President Trump. So they're in a very difficult dilemma where they can sort of appease the sort of anger vote that they received that swept them in, but then still work in a bipartisan manner to actually achieve legislative victories. So they're in a tricky situation. But yes, I think in the short term, you probably will see some gridlock. Now, that's actually good for markets, right? Traditionally, stock markets in the US have very much enjoyed gridlock. Libertarians love gridlock because the government can't do very much and inflict themselves upon the average citizens as much as sometimes they do. So I do think you'll see some of that. But I still would not count out whether Nancy Pelosi will even be the speaker. I still think that whether or not she survives an internal vote might change the dynamic in which the Dems work with the president and the Republican Party.
Nathan, when the new Congress people take their seats in January next year, what would be the priorities for the Democrats?
Well, I think they can do both in terms of investigate and legislate. They would like to get basically Obamacare and the provisions on pre-existing conditions locked down. They would like a guarantee that they won't be taken away, that 26-year-olds can stay on their parents' insurance, all the things that were very popular about Obamacare, and which they campaigned on and won on, by the way, they would like to do. They would love to get a deal on immigration to preserve the status and pathway to citizenship for the dreamers, the children of illegal immigrants who were brought here at a young age through no fault of their own. Those are two top legislative priorities. But they can also investigate. I mean, it was interesting that they haven't mentioned the impeachment word in the last 24 hours. Nancy Pelosi has sort of said, yeah, we'll investigate, but you can sort of see that they're going to do it in a way that is more professional concern about the health of the republic, that sort of way, without trying to go after Trump necessarily. You can see there's sort of a pathway, especially the release of his tax returns, that they may try and not create hysteria, but a concerned oversight role going forward, in contrast to what we've seen with the Republicans. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how they strike that balance. They know they don't want to make an enemy of Donald Trump that they can run against. They know the lesson of the Bill Clinton years and the Lewinsky affair, where he basically, his popularity increased. Tax returns are not an affair with the intern. They're actually probably a bit more serious when you're talking about criminality. But beside the point, they don't want to make Trump look like some sort of wounded president in the eyes of the people. But I think they can get some things done. And Mitch McConnell has kind of indicated that he's willing to work on some popular initiatives too. Trump ran on immigration. McConnell really didn't want to talk about that today, but he did talk about healthcare. Okay,
Amy, lots has been said and written about the role that women played in these midterm elections. I was looking at some figures. 2 years ago, 53% of white women cast their ballots for President Trump. This time, however, according to CNN exit polling, 59% of women voted for Democrats. What does that tell you? Have the Republicans and President Trump lost the female vote?
Well, it tells me that they do have a lot of work to do, and that President Trump his rhetoric, his emphasis on issues, particularly in the sort of home stretch of this midterm election, was alienating to a lot of female voters. Now, you know, they're the Women's March sort of leftists who were against him from the very beginning, from before he was elected, that were disappointed that Hillary Clinton, devastated really that she didn't win, and then of course organized those marches immediately after his inauguration, and the pink hats and so forth. But then you have those suburban women who typically would be a bit more conservative. Married white women with children, for example, typically vote Republican, but they didn't like what they were seeing in Washington, D.C., particularly at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And we had that report that Paul Ryan, the soon-to-be former Speaker of the House, had called President Trump just this last weekend and said, please make the economy your closing argument. Donald Trump decided that immigration was a bigger win for him. But as I mentioned, that issue cut against him in these more contested districts like Barbara Comstock in Virginia, where you had suburban women weighing in big time.
Although not in Florida, which was surprising to me.
That was surprising.
Yeah.
Frank, of course, all elections come with a lot of controversy, but there were some very serious and very credible accusations of voter suppression, particularly in the state of Georgia, the southern state here in the United States. The Republican candidate, who was the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, he was also in charge of conducting the election. Thousands of voters, predominantly African-American and Hispanic, were taken off the rolls. Voting machines broke down in predominantly African-American voting precincts, and that led a professor at Emory University, Carol Anderson, who is a professor of African American affairs, to say that if this election were held in the Republic of Georgia, that's the country in Central Europe, the U.S. State Department would not have hesitated to question its legitimacy.
Well, that's a bit rough.
Yeah.
But I think that there were questions raised about what Kemp was doing, what his motivations were, why he didn't recuse himself, why he didn't step out of that role. And in fact, this is the basis as we speak now for Stacey Abrams, who still has not conceded to defeat, to talk about lawsuits, to take a good hard look at this. The big difference, okay, between the Republic of Georgia and the state of Georgia is that there actually are these outside views, eyeballs on it, and there are things that candidates can do, like bring a lawsuit that actually will have a recourse. But there are several questions raised. Look, I think that one of the things that we have seen, and this is something that the Republican Party is going to have to deal with, is this theme that across a number of states, Republicans have been seeking to limit access to polling or to strike people from lists who have not voted in many years or whose names are not exactly as they appear. And that plays into at least the perception, if not the reality, that they are trying to suppress turnout. That's not something you want hung around you when you've got a diversifying electorate. People are going to get upset about that over time. Right. I'm very interested to see how this thing in Georgia plays. It could be a very big deal. There were a lot of questions raised, serious questions raised, and they need to be looked at very, very thoroughly now.
Amy, that's a pretty serious situation in Georgia. You know, I was talking about Carol Anderson, the professor in Georgia. She also said that Kemp's behavior suggests that the battle for voting rights, which she says we thought was over in the last century, is still very much in play.
Well, I think that's a bit of hyperbole, right? That the battle for voting rights compared to 100 years ago when African Americans and women were not enfranchised, I wouldn't go that far, obviously. But I agree with Frank that any irregularities or unfairness or tampering with the voting process is anti-American and anti-democratic, and it does need to be investigated. I don't think, however, that's going to change the ultimate vote count and result for Ms. Abrams. And, there was another factor in the election last night that we found out once again that celebrity endorsements don't really mean a whole lot. We saw this with Beto O'Rourke, who had huge Hollywood support, and he fell short. Ms. Abrams had Oprah Winfrey come to town. I watched the speech last week. It was electrifying, but voters vote on the issues, not what famous people in the entertainment business tell them how to vote. And let's not forget Taylor Swift in Tennessee, and her candidate went down pretty badly.
Right, and it was a great win for the first first woman to be a senator from Tennessee. Again, Republican senator, not being very trumpeted by anybody else in most of the media as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a great win for her.
I've got 10 seconds left. What does the outcome?
Suppression.
Right.
Yeah.
What does the outcome of this election tell us about Donald Trump's re-election chances in 2020?
Well, basically, it's not Trump world anymore, totally in Washington. He has a real opposition to his policies for the first time. Let's see what happens. But on the voter suppression thing, I just want to end. It is alive and well in the US throughout, and it's a big problem.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.